Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. So, Peter, during the past few days, we've seen horrific massacres taking place in Syria, and particularly in the Latakia region, which is where the Alawites reside. The Alawite is a Muslim sect that was the core of the support of ousted President Bashar al-Assad. And most of us had kind of predicted that this is what would happen, that we weren't buying into the notion that somehow this new leadership in Syria, the people who came from Al-Qaeda, people who came from ISIS, who were, radical jihadis, that these people have suddenly become liberal Democrats just because you put a man in a suit and he hangs out with Annalena Baerbock. He doesn't just become a Western Democrat. So there've really been horrific massacres. I mean, we've seen footage of bodies piling up. We've seen bodies being dragged in the streets. And what's striking is the very muted response from the West. Muted, well, one should say. There's been perfunctory reports in some of the mainstream media, but hardly the emotional, overwrought, hysterical accounts that went on during the Assad years. And at this very moment, even as we speak, sanctions are being removed from this new regime in Damascus.
This is a reward for what they're doing to the Alawites?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. So let's just show you how this has been covered. And so here is the headline in Politico: clashes. So even though essentially they can't deny that these are civilians who are being massacred, unarmed civilians are being massacred, they saw clashes in Syria kill more than 1,000 people in 2 days. The country's post-Assad leadership calls for national unity as violence escalates. So notice the sympathetic tone. They're calling for national unity.
So what is it? There's one clash and there's a second clash and they're clashing?
The clash is a clash.
It's like clickety clacks or something.
Right.
Again, a very passive voice.
That's right. Exactly. And then here, more than 1,000 people have died in 2 days of clashes and revenge killings in Syria. Whenever they use this term, revenge killings, it's done in order to justify murder. They say it's revenge killings. It's a classic. They would always do that when they decide who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. So when they have to report that the ones they deem the good guys have gone around killing men, women, and children, then it's a revenge killings. They did that in Kosovo. They did that in Bosnia. It was classic. It's a revenge killing. They started it. Revenge killings in Syria as the country's security forces allegedly killed hundreds of civilians belonging to the Alawite religious minority. Allegedly. This time they're being very careful, allegedly. Whenever they write about Russia, the allegedly is always removed.
No, it's never an allegation, it's an accusation.
Exactly. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said about 745 civilians were killed on Friday and Saturday in ongoing violence along the country's coast, along with 125 members of the government security forces and 148 fighters from an armed groups linked to ousted Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad. Syrian Observatory of Human Rights is not that.
Thank you, George. I was going to remind our viewers, take it with a grain of salt with these people.
Right, exactly.
Or this guy. It's one guy.
That's right, exactly. It's a guy living in the UK.
Yeah.
Syrian President Ahmad al-Shara, the one who's decked out, he's cut his beard and now goes around wearing suits. Ahmad al-Shara called for national unity on Sunday, saying that the country has the characteristics for survival and that what is happening in Syria now is within the expected challenges. I don't
Okay,
know what.
well, I mean, calling for national unity, it's his guys that are killing.
That's right. His guys are killing, and they're killing those they deem enemies. The base of support.
In the most grotesque
Right,
language,
right,
okay,
right.
of the most dehumanized language you can use,
Yep,
okay.
that's right. And then we must preserve national unity and internal peace. We can live together, he said. This video quoted by Reuters, speaking in a mosque in his childhood neighborhood of Maza in Damascus. The clashes erupted on Thursday and marked a major escalation in the challenge to the new government led by Shara's movement, HTS, 3 months after the insurgents took over following the removal of Assad from power. Assad was ousted last December after decades of dynastic rule by his family, marked by severe repression and a devastating civil war. Alawites, however, have been a large part of Assad's support base for decades.
Well, again, Politico is at the very least dishonest,
Oh, yeah.
okay, and even more immoral. Okay,
Yes,
the Alawites. Okay, Politico is continuing this trend in the West. Is just tying them to Assad,
right,
tying. They're one and the same. They're
right,
interchangeable. That is
right,
not true at all. The
right,
Alawites during the time of the Assad family rule had no privileges.
right,
They had no, they were not special people.
right,
The reason why the Alawites did look to Assad was because they got protections. All
right.
other minorities were given
That's
protections
right.
as well.
That's
But
right.
to single them out as somehow the DNA of the Assad regime is not true.
Yep.
It's dishonest to say that.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly right. Um, Authorities blame the Alawite targeted summary executions and deadly raids on unruly armed militias who came to help security forces and have long blamed Assad supporters for past crimes. So you first say these were revenge killings, and then you blame it on somebody else. It had nothing to do with the government. They just came and carried out some killings.
Well, that whole paragraph there, it begs more questions and gives information. I mean, what is it's a chicken or egg thing here. Well, I mean, who's committing acts of revenge?
Right.
Is it the state or is it
Right.
people protecting themselves from the
Well,
state?
that's right. Exactly. But it's very interesting that this violence is being directed at those deemed to be politically hostile to the new regime. And, entirely a coincidence. It's a national unity. I mean, heaven forbid that any minority should be targeted.
Well, they want to have national unity without these people. That's
Exactly.
the point, George.
That's right. Clashes continued overnight in several towns, and the security official told Reuters that pro Assad insurgents were now escalating their campaign. Well, that's good. They told Reuters that pro Assad insurgents were escalating their campaign, staging hit and run attacks on several public utilities in the past 24 hours. And then it says this is The Guardian. More than 1,000 people killed in 2 days of clashes. Again, 745 civilians. And then again, they're quoting the Syrian Observatory of Human Rights. And then again, fighting began on Thursday after fighters loyal to the ousted Assad regime ambushed security forces in Jable in the
How do
coastal
we know
Latakia.
that they're
How do
loyal?
you know exactly? How do they know this? Where is this information? They just report this because this is what the government told them. Oh, the fighting began when fighters loyal, and you know this, that these were loyal to the ousted Assad regime, ambushed security forces in Jable in the coastal Latakia province. So they just report this absolutely unquestioningly. Then says the wide ranging coordinated assault was the biggest challenge to the country's Islamist authorities so far, then came 3 months after opposition fighters led by Islamist rebel group HTS toppled the Syrian president Bashar al Assad. So it's a challenge. We're challenged. And then to crush the rebellion, the severe, oh,
Oh,
it's
rebellion. It's a
rebellion.
rebellion.
It's a rebellion, exactly.
Oh, it's a rebellion now.
It's a rebellion, exactly. No, it's so nice to have a rag like The Guardian, which is always, publishes content pleasing to the appropriate authorities. The crush the rebellion. The Syrian government called for reinforcements, the misspelled reinforcements, with thousands of fighters converging on. So they're now reinforced. So before, we were told that they were just random killers, but now apparently these are reinforcements for the government, with thousands of fighters converging on Syria's coast from all over the country. Though fighters are nominally under the auspices of the new Syrian government, militias still persist, some of which have been implicated in past human rights abuses and are relatively undisciplined.
Well, they
So,
kind of give it away, don't they?
yeah, so why is the government calling upon relatively undisciplined fighters to go into Latakia? And what a shock. These
Well,
relatively undisciplined forces are massacring women and children.
well, relatively undisciplined is kind of a half glass full or half glass empty. It depends on how you want to apply it. Because I've seen some videos, and these were the sanitized ones, George. I
Right,
mean, you can't put these things on YouTube. I mean,
right,
on some probably Telegram channels you
right,
can.
right.
But I mean, they look highly disciplined to me in their murder.
Yes, yeah, they're
I mean,
disciplined. Yeah,
I think you can show because they don't show any personal agony, but barrel bombs being dropped from planes.
right,
The Assad government was accused, condemned
right,
around the world for doing such a thing, and
that's
now
right,
it's freely being done by the current government in Syria
right.
without really much of a
No, no,
murmur at
without
all.
really very much. No, these anodyne reports. The Syrian government has insisted that, quote, individual actions, unquote, led to the killing of civilians. Led to the killing of civilians. So it led to it.
Well,
So
why
there
do
were
they have
these
air
are
quotes around
events, and then they're
individual action?
leading to the killing of civilians.
What are
Two
they
separate
trying to tell
events.
the what are they trying to tell the reader with individual actions and
Individual
air?
actions. They're just simply some actions that had no relationship to anything else. They were just individual actions just out there in the
Oh,
ether. You have
just
individual
like
actions and they lead to killing of civilians, which are also just out in the ether. So there's kind of one event
okay.
and then another event, and it's they just disconnected from everything else. And said the massive influx of fighters on the coast led to human rights violations. Yeah, well, I guess if you're killing civilians by the hundreds or maybe thousands, it is a kind of a human rights violation.
Well,
Video
I
sh
mean, if we're looking at this number, I mean, this has to be in a coordinated event. I mean,
yeah,
if it's, these are happening in a vacuum, we'd think maybe a few, a score,
right.
but of this magnitude, this sounds like a campaign.
It does sound like campaign because if this is the number that's been killed, think of how many have just been wounded. So you have to at least multiply that by two. So that would be 1,600. So you're talking about maybe 2,500 people targeted for killing in the space of 2 days. That's quite a campaign. That's not something you just do on a Friday afternoon. Videos show dozens of people in civilian clothes piled up dead in the town of Al Mukhtaria, where more than 40 people were killed at one time, according to the Syrian Network for Human Rights. Other videos showed fighters wearing security uniforms executing people point blank, ordering men to bark like dogs, and beating captives. The Guardian was not able to independently verify these videos. The Syrian coast is heavily
I mean,
populated.
but if the accusation had been against Assad, they wouldn't have had that sentence anyway.
Exactly. I don't think they would have had that. No. The Syrian coast is heavily populated by the minority Islamic Alawite sect from which the deposed Syrian president hailed, though most Alawites were not associated with the Assad regime. Well, that's very generous of you to put it. That yes, it's where he comes from, but they were not associated. Why would people be associated? I mean, they're just living their lives normally. Why are they associated with a
Well,
regime?
I was brought up as a Roman Catholic, but I'm not associated with the Pope.
No, I
Okay.
don't think so. No. And then here, this is the government of the UK. This is the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office. This is just announced it. Announced the other day. Update on Syria, lifting asset freezes on 24 entities. This at the same time as they're imposing any number of additional sanctions on Russia.
Well, doesn't the U.S. and British government usually impose sanctions when there's a killing
There
spree like
usually is,
this?
but not in this case. You know, and he's one of us. The UK has lifted asset freezes on 24 Syrian entities, underscoring our commitment to help Syrians rebuild their country and economy.
Oh, so the sanctions were designed to destroy
Yes,
the
yes,
country and the economy. So
yeah.
that the mask is off. That's what the sanctions
That's
were
right.
all along.
So all this time, while you were talking about, oh, we're just punishing Assad, all these sanctions you had, we're punishing Assad, you're now admitting you were destroying the country and economy. The people who were suffering was not Assad, it's the ordinary Syrians that were suffering. And of course, everyone knows this. Everyone knows the sanctions hurt ordinary people. They never hurt the governments. And it says a Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office spokesperson said, we are lifting asset freezes on 24 Syrian entities that were previously used by the Assad regime to fund the oppression of the Syrian people, including the Central Bank of Syria, Syrian Arab Airlines, and energy companies.
So see, the Syrian Arab Airlines, one of their missions was the oppression of the Syrian people. I never knew an airline could do that.
I didn't know an airline could do that. I also didn't even know is that what central banks do? Well, maybe they, when they have harsh interest rates, they are oppressing ordinary people. But I wouldn't have thought the central bank of Syria is any more harsh than other central banks. At the same time, sanctions on members of the Assad regime and those involved in the illicit trade in Captagon remain in place.
George, what is Captagon?
It's some kind of a synthetic drug. It's like what's the thing well, fentanyl is a synthetic drug, and the one that they had in Breaking Bad, methamphetamine.
Oh, okay. All right.
It's
A
a
meth.
synthetic, yeah,
Okay, meth. Yeah.
yeah. Um, and this approach underscores our commitment to help the people of Syria rebuild their country and economy. It's so touching. I mean,
Yeah, but
uh,
if
uh,
you're an Alawite, the sanction relief isn't going to help you, apparently.
right. Exactly. No, I don't think so. Including now, you think you would wait a little bit before you start lifting sanctions. You want to basically take a look, see what this government is going to do. I mean, this is almost no time at all has elapsed since they took over in Damascus, and it's not as though they were giving off very positive signs. I mean, just simply you put the man in a suit. What does that mean? And now we've seen what's going on in Syria. So they lift the sanctions just as these massacres are taking place, including through support for Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political transition process. So these jihadis are doing this Syrian-owned political transition process. Notice we haven't had any kind of a political transition. I mean, where's the democracy? I mean, we haven't seen too much of that.
Well,
Um,
I mean, I don't. I'm sorry, I have to say the obvious here. Syrian-owned political transition process, is that what's happening against the Alawites?
I guess it's Syrian owned.
It's Syrian-owned.
That's right, Syrian owned. Now the thing is that one has to appreciate that the West couldn't give a damn about the Alawites. I mean, if every single Alawite is actually massacred within the next few weeks, the West isn't going to give a damn. It's just going to be absolutely. They're going to be, talking about something else.
Well, George, it's part of the political transition.
It's part of the political transition. We will continue to judge Syria's interim authorities by their actions, not their word. That's exactly the opposite. You're entirely judging it by their words, not by their
Well,
actions.
but it begs the question, and it's you're right. It's early days. It's only been a few months here, but it seems that the HTS they're challenged, if I can use that word, in governing, but not in killing, which
Right,
that's what their old forte has always been,
right,
is to
exactly.
suppress and oppress
Right,
people. And
right.
no, they're just going back to their old habits. That's what it
Yes,
looks like to me.
that's what it looks like to me too, because we saw all of these things in the during the Syrian civil war, all the cruelty that they inflicted, these horrific killings, the torture, the humiliation. Going back to the 2015, 2016, earlier than that. Yeah, so this is all of a piece. I don't see any transition here. It's the same act by the same people. And here, this is from the European Union. This is from the Ursula von der Leyen and Kaya Kallas's group. Syria, EU suspends restrictive measures on key economic sectors. And that's 24th of February. I want to show the 24th of February. So barely any time at all has elapsed since they took power. I mean, that was in December. So we're only talking about a couple of months. And here we have the council decided today to suspend a number of restrictive measures in view of the situation in Syria. The decision is part of the EU's efforts to support an inclusive political transition in Syria. It has to be inclusive. We're committed to inclusivity. Um, and its swift economic recovery, reconstruction, and stabilization. And again, one should emphasize just what you said. So, in other words, you're admitting that the sanctions was done in order to cripple and destroy Syrian society, which is what happened. I mean, which is in the end why the government of Assad fell. I mean, because people were just living so miserably, having defeated Al Qaeda in 2015, 2016. There was no respite. They didn't get any benefits from that.
Well, it looks like the council has decided today is to empower the behavior and mindset of HTS. That's what it looks like to
Right.
me.
That's
They
right.
want to see this terrorist group succeed.
Succeed. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, yeah. Um, and the EU aims to facilitate engagement with Syria. The way they have this jargon,
I
it's
don't
just
know.
fascinating, this jargon that they've invented. Facilitate engagement with Syria, its people and businesses in key areas of energy and transport, as well as to facilitate financial and banking transactions associated with such sectors and those needed for humanitarian and reconstruction purposes. That's
It looks
awfully,
like they're trying to, looks like this is a nation building effort on the part of the EU to build up the nation of HTS.
that's right. And I will bet you anything that this will continue. They will not reimpose these sanctions in the light of what's happened. They will not reimpose them. They'll just say, "Oh, they started it. These are revenge killings." It was this ambush. It was the Assad's forces
Yeah.
ambushed security forces. And here is the Economist editorial. Oh, this is a news story. So this is in the same issue of The Economist. We have Syria's economy is still strangled by sanctions, is on its knees. It will not improve until they are lifted. So this is The Economist, the in-house magazine of the corporate neoliberal elite. This is what they read on their when they're traveling business class from one conference to another. They read this. Sanctions have to be lifted. This is the Economist.
Well, George, I would bet you anything we could just randomly pick an article from The Economist over the last 10 years up until December of last year. And, the Assad regime is killing its own people, killing its civilians. It
Right,
is
right,
marginalizing minority groups and
right,
the barrel bombs.
right.
But that's all going on now.
That's right. That's right. And I'm sure that during that time, The Economist was saying we should tighten the sanctions. Bashar al Assad is only able to carry out his horrendous crimes because the sanctions are not being enforced harshly enough. And then here, during the war, Syria's economy shrank by 85%. Well, why did it shrink by 85%? 85%. I wonder how that happened. Exports slumped.
Everyone, to put that into context, the American economy at the depths of the Great Depression, the American economy, and we all know, the Dust Bowl, the Grapes of Wrath, all of this, great films during that time, by the way, contracted 25%.
Right,
That was the Great Depression
right,
of the
right,
1930s. The
right,
US economy contracted 25%.
right,
In the 1990s, in Russia, the economy contracted 50%.
right,
Okay.
right. Yeah, yeah. 85%. Exports slumped from 18 billion a year before the war to 1.8 billion in 2020. Well, now why did that happen? Well, it
Oh, well, there were
happened.
plenty of people in Brussels and London slapping their knee. God, we got it down to 1.8.
That's right, exactly.
We gotta get down to 0.8 next year.
That's right, exactly. That's what they did. This is what they did. This is the misery that they inflicted on a poor country. This is what they did. This is these scum, this very wealthy countries. These are among the wealthiest countries in the world in Europe and the United States, and they inflicted this on Syria. And what was Syria's crime? They didn't like the government. They didn't like Bashar al-Assad, so they inflicted this. And they can say this has nothing to do with the government. You're supposed to be punishing Assad, and yet the economy shrinks by 85%. How is that punishing Assad? It's punishing the ordinary people. Foreign exchange reserves hit 18.5 billion in 2010, but only 200 million remain. Again, wow, isn't that great? Well, sanctions are working. Not enough to cover a month of imports. The Syrian lira has plunged from 50 to the dollar to almost 11,000. Typical wages are not nearly enough to cover even basic living expenses. More than 90% of Syrians live below the poverty line. So you've done a good job. I mean, they write this in a way of, wow, things are really bad in Syria. And I wonder how that came about. It's like,
Oh,
you look at somebody in a hospital who has been beaten to a bloody pulp, say, wow, that person is really suffering from injuries. Look at his head. That must really hurt. Uh, you
well,
know,
okay, look at this paragraph. And George and I can fix it really quickly with a few words. So during the war, Syria's economy shrank by 85%. Now we can change it. Due to Western sanctions, comma, exports slumped. Okay,
but
okay, then I'm going to finish it. More than 90% of Syrians live below the poverty line as a result of Western sanctions. See
exactly.
how just four or
That's
five
right.
words?
That's right. And they write this. Many people have been writing about the sanctions and what the sanctions did to Syria. All these years, many people wrote about it. I mean, it's not like no one knew about this, before The Economist deigned to address the issue. So more than 90% of Syrians live below the poverty line. We need to do something about that. We got to help the Syrians.
We got to help
I
HTS.
love the Syrian people. We got to help the Syrian people.
We have to help HTS.
That's right. Um, and then the main cause of this misery is the war, which devastated the country's industry and infrastructure and killed and displaced many of its people. No, the main
No, it
cause,
was sanctions.
it was sanctions. Sanctions, and not just the sanctions, it's the outright theft of Syria's resources by the United States, which occupied large parts of the country, including its oil refineries, its oil fields, and its wheat fields. So it wasn't just the sanctions; its resources were stolen by the United States. Oh, it's the war. It's the devastating war. But the web of Western sanctions imposed on Syria to punish its dictator Bashar al-Assad for his grotesque abuses of human rights contributed to the collapse. Oh, but the human rights abuses were grotesque. So it
Yeah,
contributed.
but
It contributed to something.
the sanctions were imposed on the Syrian people, not on Assad.
Exactly. Exactly. But the abuses were grotesque. I mean, they were just grotesque. So He kind of brought it on himself. The Syrian people brought it on themselves because they were grotesque. And whereas the war is now over and Mr. Assad overthrown, the sanctions are still in place. Suddenly the economist has woken up and said, well, the sanctions. So up until then, presumably the sanctions were fine. It was fine to inflict this misery on the Syrian people. Never once did the economists complain about the sanctions on Syria.
No, I don't know. I haven't seen this article, but Israel still very much wants to keep the country under sanction.
Yeah, I
So,
think so. I think so.
and that'll probably be the result.
Yes, yes. Um, and then the Assad regime survived the suffocating embargo for so long for two reasons. Now we're getting to the nub of the matter. First, it befriended other pariahs, including Iran and Russia. Who says they're pariahs? I mean, I love sort of use of this language. This is the Economist. Pariahs, including Iran and Russia. Well, it may be a pariah. They may be pariahs to you. I mean, they're not.
Yeah,
No one else regards them as pariahs.
and Assad's father had a very robust relationship with the Soviet Union, so it may make it sound like it just,
Yes,
this was something that's relatively recent. It's
right.
not true.
That's right. Which exactly that goes back to 1971, which helped prop it up not only militarily but also economically. Second, but having described all that misery, doesn't it seem like Iran and Russia were actually engaged in a humanitarian enterprise? They helped to prop it up, not only militarily, but also economically. So they had to have done something good, because they provided some humanitarian relief. They provided some food. Otherwise, the country would have just simply starved to death. Second, it turned Syria into a narco state. By the early 2020s, it had become the world's biggest producer of Captagon, an amphetamine-like narcotic, which brought in perhaps 6 billion a year. Most of this income stayed abroad and was used to pay for the regime's imports. Now, I don't know if this is true, but this is always the consequence of sanctions. I mean, if you impose sanctions on a country, you know what? They're going to get into all kinds of other lucrative industries, arms trafficking, drug manufacture, all kinds of smuggling and everything. That's what happens with sanctions. People need to make a living. And that's what happens when you need to make a living. You just make a living with whatever's going. And so even if this is true about the Captagon, it came about as a result of the sanction.
I strongly object to the last two sentences here. I would really like some kind of according to,
Right, right,
as cited by.
right.
Okay, there's nothing there. And so when I see something like that, George, in The Economist, I'm sorry, everyone. I just assume it's a lie. I'm sorry.
It's a
That's my
good.
default position.
I think it's a not injudicious assumption. um, and then but it says here most of this income stayed abroad and was used to pay for the regime's imports. Well, that sounds good. I mean, it's not like, oh, most of this income was then used by the regime, to pay for gambling and hookers in Monte Carlo. I mean, they paid for the regime's imports, so that's at least some way to help the people. Um, and neither of these survival mechanisms is still functioning. Syria's new leader, Ahmed al-Sharaa, is keen to be seen as legitimate. He has cracked down on Captagon production. So you say. I mean, first of all, you bring up this Captagon production. We're making. And now he has cracked down. How do you know this? How do you know he has cracked down on Captagon
Well, George,
productions?
usually a lucrative business sector, even if it's illicit, you take it over.
You take it over. Yeah. We need to close this down. I mean, who does that? He
Well, I
also.
mean, Tony Soprano would say, well, he's a good earner. Remember that?
That's right. He's a good.
Ah, he's a good earner.
That's right.
Okay.
He's a good earner. Yes, he's a really unpleasant, obnoxious guy, but he's a good earner. He also is no friend to Iran and Russia, whose forces pummeled HTS during the Civil War. God, the swine! They pummeled Al Qaeda during the Civil War. I mean, what a terrible thing to do. He's no friend of Iran and Russia. Yeah, that's right. Iran and Russia were the good guys that were fighting against jihadi extremists, which I thought the United States deemed to be threats to world peace and stability. I mean, that's what we've been told ever since the days of 9/11.
Well, George, I mean, is there reference in this article that HTS was former Al Qaeda?
No,
No, of course not.
no. They just say HTS. So, in other words, assuming that people have no idea what that is. Um, And instead, Mr. Sharar has tried to liberalize the economy. This is the kind of the economist, purring. Oh, he's liberalizing the
I
economy.
didn't know he was a libertarian.
Yeah, that's a liberalizing economy. That's like taking away tariffs. He's removing tariffs. It's a liberalizing economy. He's bringing in a free market. I mean, there's no market, but it's free in the hope of stimulating growth. He has simplified customs fees and lifted a ban on foreign currency. He's also radically reforming the bureaucracy, sacking lots of civil servants, and promising to raise sharply the salaries of those who remain. So he's basically a
Oh,
model.
I'm sorry, you guys. I just have a hard time believing. I mean, this is what they want him to do to they want to legitimize
Exactly.
him. Okay.
Exactly.
Is he
Exactly.
doing this? I have no idea. I can't imagine that they do.
I
Okay.
can't imagine, and I doubt very much, but even if he was doing this, it would work. He's radically reforming the bureaucracy, sacking lots of civil servants. So you're adding to the unemployment rolls. I mean, it sounds like it's like a very poor country, and you're sacking a whole bunch of people. And he's promising to raise sharply the salaries of those who remain. And where's the money coming from for raising the salary? He hopes to attract foreign investment to resuscitate Syria's energy industry.
Well, does that mean the US is going to leave? It's stealing its oil.
Yeah, that's what I was. Yeah, I wonder about that. Yeah, um, and rebuild its infrastructure. Well, yes, that's right. But without relief from sanction, all these efforts will be in vain. So,
What is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say. So all these years, not the economists didn't waste one tear of pity for Syria. All these years of the sanctions. Sanctions started in 2011. So basically, this went on 13 years of sanctions. Not one editorial, not one tear was shed for the Syrians. And now suddenly they're very anxious. Well, we're going to what about the infrastructure? What about the energy industry? We need to help them out.
What I see here, and again, it's really early days, but it looks like these people are trying to get ahead of the shark here, is that they want to somehow see Syria stabilized under this obnoxious government. They have not proven anything honorable in my eyes. They just want to stabilize it so it cannot impact, influence its neighbors, particularly Israel, and it wants to keep it isolated from Lebanon, and they want the relationship with Iran cut. They just want to. They want to. They don't care if this place boils and boils and
No, no,
boils, as
no.
long as it's not a threat to any of its neighbors.
Right,
Okay,
right, right,
and so just enough so they're not starving,
right,
just enough
right.
where they're functioning. Because what we're seeing now is the balkanization of Syria. This George and I predicted this from the
Right, right.
get-go. Okay, from the
But
get-go.
it's you've got Turkey has taken a slice. Turkey is not going to hand any of that over. I mean, they're keeping it, and Israel has taken a slice, and they're not going to hand any of that over. So there's it's just a little bit of the Syria that remains, and presumably they want this little chunk of Syria to follow the proper economic model, the proper IMF prescribed economic model. So I, this is a country really on the brink of total collapse, but you have to
Yep.
follow the IMF model.
You
Um,
know, I've thought from the very beginning this may sound fantastic to some people, but I wouldn't be surprised, and I mean this in all sincerity. I would not be surprised if the Israelis were coveting Damascus. Somehow we can get Damascus and we can
yeah,
push these people out. Okay.
right.
Because the Israelis are, once they take a piece of real estate, they never give it back.
No, no,
Okay.
no,
Ever.
no. Um, um, And then in the long run, Syria needs vast foreign investment for reconstruction. Perhaps a third of homes, roughly half of schools and hospitals have been destroyed or damaged. And then, and so on. The government hopes the diaspora will pour money into the country. Why would the diaspora
Why
pour
would
money?
the diaspora? I can tell you, everyone, the vast majority of the diaspora would be arrested at the border, if not
Right,
worse.
yeah, and then the Turkish firms are eyeing up contracts. Why? Turkish firms will only invest in those parts of Syria that are occupied by Turkey. They're not going to give anything to this government. Turkish firms. Since Turkey basically has annexed a chunk of Syria, that's where Turkish firms will operate.
Well, from the fall of the Assad government to the present, Turkish firms are not eyeing up contracts. Turkish firms are stealing factories and
That's
companies and
that's right.
assets.
That's
They're
right.
not eyeing contracts.
No,
They're stealing.
that's right. That's right. Um, So, yet a big influx of capital from abroad is impossible while the sanctions remain in place. Syria is a low priority for America's new administration. It is not clear what Mr. Shara can do to get its attention. Well, I guess killing lots of people might get its attention. I mean, that's one thing they can do to get Trump's attention. And then here's another. The economists lifting sanctions on Syria seems so. This is a big campaign being
Look
waged
at
by the
that, George.
economists.
Isn't that really cute? The Economist, leaders helping Syrians.
That's right.
Wow. Wow. For 11 years,
That's right.
perished the thought.
That's
And
right.
now
Exactly. Without a reprieve, the country will become a failed state.
it is
Huh.
a failed state.
It's a failed state. And again, when you read these articles, there's no mention of Israel's occupation of the country, no mention of Turkey's occupation of the country, no mention of this is an offshoot of Al Qaeda. The guy used to be number two at ISIS. No mention of any of that. Just they're just following this wonderful economic model, which Bashar al-Assad himself did. I mean, Assad himself had followed the kind of IMF prescribed model, at least in the early days of his government. And here again the same thing. And I guess so the argument for keeping sanctions is that they create leverage to push Mr. Shara down a more liberal path. The trouble is that unless they are lifted now, they will cause an economic calamity that shuts off that same liberal path by creating violence and extremism. So the so yeah so the more violence and extremism, the more we need to lift sanctions. Oh, that's really cute. So therefore, what happened this weekend? The Economist next week in the editorial. Yeah, we told you we need to lift sanctions. That's the remedy. Um, Anarchy would probably suit Mr. Shara's opponents, the swinish opponents. So notice how they made Shara out into be some kind of a hero.
Yep.
Anarchy would probably suit his opponents. Other armed Islamist groups chafe at the power he has accumulated.
No, he hasn't accumulated. He's been bequeathed power
Wow.
by
That's
international recognition.
that's right.
That's where his power is.
That's right.
Is it in Syria?
Right.
No, his power comes from the end of a barrel of a gun. That's
That's
what
right.
we're witnessing.
That's right. Fearful of an implosion, Israel is trying to impose a demilitarized zone south of Damascus. So Israel is just being
Oh, wow. This is an amazing thing. Fearful of an implosion. Yes, what they're doing is creating an implosion.
That's right.
Okay. God.
Exactly. Impose a demilitarized zone south of Damascus. If Syria collapses, more refugees will surely flood into Europe. So so we got to get rid of these sanctions right away. That's the view from the of neoliberal orthodoxy. And just in time come these horrific massacres. And as I say, this will be used by the economists, by the Financial Times to say, well, we need to get rid of the sanctions. That's what's causing these massacres. If only the economy was booming and everyone was thriving, we wouldn't have these massacres.
Remember, civil society was rising up against remember all of those, it
Right.
was like 2011.
Yeah.
And, and so, thousands of people were killed, and the Assad government was blamed. But now we have HTS doing exactly the same thing, but we must reward them for
That's
what
right.
they're doing.
That's right.
I mean, just the absurdity of all of this.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, they're just wiping it away. I mean, the first few days of this in December, George and I knew this was coming.
Of course.
We talked about it at great length.
Right.
Okay. What it is it's going to remain a killing ground as long as legitimacy is given to these
Right.
people. Okay.
Yeah.
Because it's not the power of their ideas. Okay. It's not their mother's, cheese sauce. It's a gun.
Hmm.
And it seems to me that his fighters, who, by the way, everyone are Chechen, Uzbek, Uyghurs, they don't even speak
Arabic.
Arabic.
Yeah. Yep. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Um,
I
uh,
mean, again, I'm not suggesting people look at it because I find it abhorrent, but undisciplined, these people are undisciplined. These people look like hell on earth to me,
right.
with the glee of dropping barrel bombs. I mean, that is the most indiscriminate thing you can imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wonder what it's going to hit. Okay. Or
Yeah.
jumping up and down on a corpse and laughing about it. And you call that undisciplined.
Right.
It seems to me a very disciplined death cult to me.
Right. Yeah, yeah, that's right. But I think it's so instructive. First of all, the contrast between how this is covered in the media with the years, decades long hysteria about Bashar al-Assad, the gleeful imposition of sanctions and all manner of economic punishment, which, as they now admit, cause misery among the ordinary people, not to the government. The government they carried on living nicely, ordinary people, and now they want to reward these same rulers who are overseeing these horrific massacres. They want to reward them by lifting all sanctions. And already they're moving. I mean, with the EU and the UK have already moved to remove sanctions. So they're not waiting for anything. So this is the orthodoxy of these Western elites. No principles whatsoever, none whatsoever, and a really horrific cruelty that they're perfectly happy with.
Yeah,
And they
but
beat their
George,
chest about about something or other, like about Assad or anything else. They beat their chest. Oh
yeah,
God, human rights. They don't care about human rights.
but they're cutting the budget. They're firing unnecessary civil servants. They're getting rid of taxes and tariffs. I mean, this is Ron Paul. This is the Ron
This is
Paul of
exactly
Syria.
Ron Paul. But
And
Elon Musk.
we like Ron Paul, guys. Don't
That's right.
worry.
But Elon Musk, he better not.
There you
Don't you
go.
dare start firing any civil servants in America where you really do have a bloated bureaucracy. Hey, don't you dare do that. He's removing customs. So that really is fantastic. So yeah, this is a really horrific events, and Western hypocrisy is at its most obnoxious at the moment.
And as George said at the very top, the killing of these thousands of Alawites, I think the killing will continue
Yeah, I
until the
think so too.
Alawites
Yeah,
until they're gone. Till
right.
they're gone.
Yeah,
This is ethnic cleansing. Again, Western-backed supported ethnic
okay,
cleansing.
right,
And again, I want to stress, just because Assad came from the Alawite community doesn't mean that the Alawite community is Assad.
right,
There is no evidence that they had any special treatment. They
right,
all were immiserated in Syria. Everybody,
right,
okay?
right.
So because of Western sanctions. So, but I had an inclination we were going to talk about this today. I checked Al Jazeera. They're hook, line, and sinker. Oh, yep, revenge,
Revenge.
because
It
they
was all. It
supported.
was provoked. It
And,
was
and,
all
and then
provoked by the
Amy
Alawites. Yeah,
Goodman over at Democracy Now!
Yep.
Exactly the same.
Right.
These are supposed to be progressives.
Yes.
That's what Al Jazeera is. It's progressive nonsense. Almost all of their
Of course. Yeah.
broadcasters.
Yeah.
Okay,
Exactly.
so it's a junk. Most of it's just junk.
Yeah.
It's well done. I'll give you that. It's well done,
Right.
but it's just obnoxious how they can go on and on about Gaza, which they should. But with the Alawites, well, they don't.
Yeah.
It's just
That's right. Yeah.
they backed the wrong donkey. It's their
That's right.
fault.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, no, that's right. These are revenge killings. It was they started it. These militias loyal to Bashar al-Assad, they started it. The good guy, the government in Damascus, they're the good guys. They're trying to reinstate national unity. They want to make sure that there is inclusivity. The process of inclusivity is, yeah. It's Al Jazeera and almost all of the progressive press. I mean, we saw it in the Guardian, we saw it in Politico. The rest of the media, they have barely even touched it. There's almost nothing about it in the New York Times, nothing about it in the Washington Post, other than a very perfunctory report, usually a wire service report. They're not interested. They have their story. Syria, fantastic. The bad guys were driven out. Good guys are in charge. Don't spoil it. Don't spoil that story.
And God forbid you mention what Turkey's doing, what Israel is doing. I mean, and then again, it doesn't get much coverage. Syrians seeking refuge in Russia still has a military base there. Oh, that's kind of embarrassing. People
Right.
want Russian protection.
Right. Right.
I mean, their whole world becomes unraveled when you start mentioning basic facts.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
All right, that's a first part of our Sunday mega wrap, as we're wont to do. This is the Gaggle with Peter and George. We're on local, so please go to thegaggle.locals.com. Live stream tomorrow. When do you change your hours,
Well,
George?
that's very interesting. So, Peter, you'll get a break. It's going to be 1 hour earlier tomorrow. So it's still 10 a.m. Eastern time, but because in the United States they've jumped forward an hour already. I haven't, but the United States has. So it's going to be still 10 a.m. Eastern time, but for you, whatever it is,
Well,
but it's an
can
hour
you
earlier.
call up Elon and tell him to get rid of this thing?
I
It,
tried.
it this
I,
it,
I,
it, it's
I've done everything I could possibly do. It's one of the stupidest things. Everyone hates it, and everyone's been talking about it for years and years of getting rid of it, and it never happens. So why? I mean, Russia got rid of it. Why can't everybody else get rid of it?
That was Dmitry Medvedev's greatest achievement during his presidency. All right, go ahead, Joe.
Yeah. So 10 a.m. Eastern time, and there's the problem of the dogs. They're chomping at the bit, and they're looking askance at the tip jar, and they're saying it needs to be moving in another direction. They're going to get onto the Economist and demand an editorial from the Economist about the tip jar.
We're matching today.
Yeah, that's yes, it is. So if you have a few bob in your pocket, behind the sofa cushion, under the mattress, wherever, whip them out. Every coin into the tip jar. They don't leave anything. Just straight into the tip jar. We're very grateful for all of your help, friendship, and support. The more you're able to donate, the more of these videos we can make, the more we can improve with the technology, and we might get these dogs into a better mood. Who knows? Miracles can happen. So remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye bye.